I've always thought of myself as someone who lived a pretty steady, predictable life. My apartment wasn't big, but it was mine. I had my routine: work, gym, cooking simple meals, and sometimes hanging out with a small circle of friends. Nothing wild, nothing messy. That was exactly how I liked it. At least, until Daniel showed up at my door with a backpack over his shoulder and that familiar half-grin plastered on his face. "Man, you're not gonna believe the drama," he said, pushing past me like he already knew I'd let him in. I leaned against the doorframe, eyebrows raised. "You got kicked out again, didn't you?" He dropped his bag in the hallway with a thud and collapsed onto my couch as if it belonged to him. "They're overreacting. Just a couple of misunderstandings." I smirked. I'd heard this song before. Daniel had been living with a group of roommates, 2 guys and a girl, for the past year, and if his reputation was anything to go by, misunderstandings usually meant too much action for the household to handle. "Misunderstandings like you bringing people home every other night?" I asked, shutting the door. He laughed, running a hand through his messy dark hair. "What can I say? They knew what they were signing up for. It's not my fault I have needs." The way he said it made my ears burn, but I didn't let it show. Daniel had always been like this, unapologetically open about his appetite for attention, for connection, for whatever it was that drove him to constantly seek physical closeness. Most of the time he framed it as a joke, but it wasn't lost on me how often he crossed lines other people wouldn't. I should have told him no. I should have said my place wasn't a hotel. But the truth was, I'd always had a soft spot for him. Daniel had this reckless energy that contrasted so much with my calm routine, and as much as I pretended to roll my eyes at his antics, part of me enjoyed the chaos he carried with him. "All right," I said, sighing like I was doing him a favor. "You can stay for a while, but I'm not your maid, and I'm not your landlord. Respect my space." He grinned, that boyish grin that had probably gotten him out of trouble more times than I could count. "Knew I could count on you. You're a lifesaver." That night set the tone for the days that followed. Daniel slipped into my life as if he'd always belonged there. He sprawled on my couch watching late-night TV, left half-empty soda cans on the counter, and hummed tunelessly while he showered. He was irritating and entertaining in equal measure. But what caught me off guard wasn't his habits. It was the small, quiet moments that started to creep into my awareness. Like the first evening, when I came back from the gym and found him lying shirtless on the couch, one arm draped over his forehead like he was posing for some lazy magazine photo shoot. The flickering light of the TV highlighted the lines of his chest and the faint trail of hair leading down his stomach. He didn't even flinch when I walked in, just glanced over, gave a lopsided smile and asked, "Good workout." I muttered something about it being fine, but my eyes lingered longer than they should have before I retreated to the kitchen. Or the time he brushed past me in the hallway, his shoulder bumping mine. It was casual, accidental even, but the warmth of that brief contact stayed with me longer than it had any right to. Daniel had always been a friend, nothing more. At least that's what I told myself. But living with him blurred lines I hadn't realized were so thin. We developed a rhythm quickly. I'd cook, he'd clean, or at least pretend to. We'd sit at the small kitchen table, him telling stories about his failed attempts at staying in one place, me pretending not to laugh at his exaggerations. He had a way of filling the room, not just with noise but with presence, as if the walls themselves leaned in to hear what he had to say. And yet, beneath all the laughter and teasing, there was something I didn't want to admit. I noticed him. Noticed the way his muscles flexed when he reached for something on the top shelf. Noticed the way his damp hair clung to his forehead when he came out of the shower. Noticed the curve of his smile when he caught me staring and decided to make a joke out of it. I told myself it was harmless. Attraction didn't mean anything if I didn't act on it. Daniel was straight, or at least he claimed to be, though I'd heard enough rumors to question that. Regardless, he wasn't mine, and I wasn't about to ruin a friendship over a passing crush. Still, at night, lying in bed, I replayed the moments in my head. His laughter echoing down the hall. The casual way he draped himself across the couch. Unbothered, comfortable in his own skin. The faint scent of his cologne mixing with the soap in the bathroom after he'd finished showering. It all lodged itself somewhere inside me, tugging at feelings I wasn't ready to name. One evening, about a week after he'd moved in, we sat side by side on the couch, a movie playing in the background. I don't even remember what it was. We weren't really paying attention. Daniel leaned back, stretching his arm across the backrest casually, so close that his fingers brushed my shoulder. He didn't move it and I didn't pull away. It was nothing, just a touch. Friends do that all the time. At least that's what I told myself. But my heart beat a little faster, and I found myself wondering if he could feel the tension I was trying so hard to hide. Daniel didn't mention it. He just kept talking about the movie, making jokes, his arm still resting behind me as if it belonged there. And in that moment, I realized something I didn't want to admit out loud. Having him here wasn't just about helping a friend. It was about the way he made me feel curious, nervous, alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. I told myself I could handle it, that it was just a temporary arrangement, just a little tension I'd get used to. But deep down, I knew better. Daniel wasn't just a guest. He was a disruption, and maybe, just maybe, the kind I'd secretly been waiting for. I've always had a complicated relationship with my body. I wouldn't call myself insecure exactly, but I noticed everything. Every muscle that refused to grow, every stubborn line that wouldn't sharpen no matter how many hours I spent at the gym. I'd scroll through fitness posts online and wonder if I was doing something wrong, if all my effort still left me looking average. It was silly, maybe, but numbers gave me comfort. Reps, sets, calories, kilograms. I liked having something measurable, something that could tell me if I was making progress. And that was when it hit me. I had a tape measure tucked away in one of my drawers. I hadn't used it in months. The idea was innocent at first. Measure my arms, chest, waist, see where I stood. But as I pictured myself trying to stretch the tape around my shoulders alone, a different thought crept in. What if Daniel helped me? It wasn't such a crazy request, was it? People did body measurements all the time. But my mind didn't stop at the thought of numbers. It leapt ahead, to his hands brushing against my skin, to the way his focus would sharpen as he leaned close, to the teasing remarks he'd probably make. My stomach tightened just imagining it. The more I thought about it, the more the idea rooted itself in my head. It was harmless on the surface, yet filled with possibilities I couldn't ignore. That evening, after dinner, I lingered in my room, staring at the open drawer where the tape rested. My heart was already beating faster, as if my body knew what I was about to do. I peeled off my jeans and stood there in nothing but a pair of fitted white boxers. They clung to me in all the right ways, leaving little room to hide anything. I hesitated, then pulled on a loose t-shirt. Too obvious? Maybe. But I told myself if this was going to work, I had to at least look like I was serious about tracking progress. I paced my room for a full 5 minutes, rehearsing the request in my head. Hey, could you give me a hand with this? I need someone to wrap it around my back. Casual. Simple. Don't overthink it. Finally, I grabbed the tape and walked into the living room. Daniel was sprawled on the couch again, one leg bent up, phone in hand, the TV flickering soundlessly in the background. He looked up at me with that usual lazy grin. "Sup?" he asked. I forced a laugh, trying not to let my nerves show. "Hey, could you help me with something?" His eyebrow arched, amused. "That depends. What's the favor?" I held up the tape measure like proof. "I want to check my progress. Arms, chest, waist. Can't do it accurately on my own." For a second, I thought he'd tease me, but instead he sat up, pocketed his phone, and stretched. "Sure. Give me that thing." Just like that. No hesitation, no suspicion. I handed it over and tugged the hem of my t-shirt, nerves tightening in my chest. "Thanks. Just, make sure it's snug." "Don't worry, man, I got you." He gave me a playful smirk. "Professional measurer right here." I rolled my eyes, but my mouth curved in a smile anyway. That was Daniel, never missing a chance to turn something ordinary into a joke. I pulled my shirt over my head, pretending it was no big deal, though I felt his gaze flick over me for a split second. My skin prickled under the air of the room, already aware of the closeness that was about to follow. "All right, Stand straight, he said, stepping closer. His voice was casual, but my heart thundered as I obeyed. He started with my shoulders, wrapping the tape carefully around my back. His fingers brushed the top of my arm, warm against my skin. I told myself it was just part of the process, but the touch lingered in my mind longer than it should have. Not bad, he muttered, squinting at the number. You've definitely bulked up since last year. Yeah, I asked too quickly, craving the validation. Yeah, all those protein shakes paying off, I guess. I laughed, but it came out nervous. Next, he moved to my biceps. The tape slid snugly around my arm, his thumb grazing the inside of my elbow as he adjusted it. My chest tightened at the contact. Flex, he said, smirking. I flexed, trying to play it cool, but the way his fingers pressed into my skin made it impossible to think of numbers. I could smell him, faint deodorant mixed with the warmth of his skin. Solid, he said with a nod. What are you benching now? 110, I managed, though my voice came out lower than I intended. Not bad. He gave my arm a quick squeeze before moving the tape again. It was nothing friendly, casual, but it left me reeling. Then came my chest. He looped the tape around me, his arm brushing against my side as he leaned close to check the number. My breath caught. His knuckles skimmed my ribs, deliberate or not, and I felt my pulse hammering in my throat. Chest looks good, he said, tapping the tape lightly against me. Thanks, I muttered, though it barely sounded like my voice. We both laughed lightly, as if to cover the charged air between us, but the tension only grew thicker. When he crouched to measure my waist, I nearly lost it. His fingers brushed over my stomach as he adjusted the tape, his touch warm and grounding. I held my breath, every nerve alive. Relax, dude, he teased, glancing up at me. You're stiff as a board. I'm not gonna mess it up. Yeah, I know, I said quickly, forcing a laugh. But it wasn't the tape I was worried about. The numbers didn't matter anymore. What mattered was how close he was, how the casual brush of his skin sent heat coursing through me. And for the first time, I wondered if he noticed too, or if it was all in my head. I don't know the exact moment when it shifted from a harmless idea into something else. Maybe it was when Daniel's knuckles skimmed the side of my stomach, or when his arm pressed against me as he leaned in to read the numbers. All I know is that by the time he slid the tape down to my hips, I was hyper-aware of everything. Every breath, every flicker of movement, every accidental brush of skin. The tape wasn't just a strip of fabric anymore. It was a live wire strung between us. Hold still, he muttered, crouching slightly as he looped the tape lower. His head was level with my stomach, and I had to look away just to keep my composure. I could feel it happening, my body reacting in ways I couldn't control. Heat pooled low in my stomach. My skin prickled as if charged. My breaths grew shallow, and I prayed Daniel wouldn't notice. But of course, he noticed everything. Whoa, he chuckled, glancing up at me. You're really into this, huh? The words hit me like a shock. My first instinct was to laugh it off, so I did, though it came out shaky. Hey, I'm just trying to get accurate numbers. Sure you are, he teased, shaking his head. His smile was playful, but there was something else in his eyes, something unreadable. I wanted to believe he was just messing around, that he didn't mean anything by it. But the longer he stayed crouched in front of me, the more the air thickened between us. His fingers adjusted the tape again, brushing against the waistband of my boxers. It wasn't deliberate, at least I told myself it wasn't, but the contact sent a jolt through me. My body responded before my mind could catch up, a tightening that made me curse myself silently. I shifted my weight, trying to mask it, but Daniel's eyes flicked downward for a split second. He didn't comment, though. He just cleared his throat and jotted down the number with a muttered, "All right, got it." I exhaled slowly, relief flooding me that he hadn't said anything more. But the relief didn't last, because instead of stepping back, he stood, tape still in hand, and moved closer again. So close I could feel the heat radiating off him. His shoulder brushed mine as he lined the tape across my chest once more. "Double check," he explained casually. "Right?" I said, Though my voice sounded foreign, strained, the tape tightened around me. His breath tickled the side of my neck as he leaned in. I stared straight ahead, refusing to meet his gaze, but my heart pounded so hard I was sure he could hear it. "You're tense?" he said softly, almost amused. "I'm fine," I lied. "Mm." His tone suggested he didn't believe me, but he didn't push it. We both pretended this was nothing more than what it was supposed to be. Pretended it was casual, harmless, just numbers on a tape. But I felt the truth in every brush of his skin against mine. Every inch of space he didn't bother to give back once he'd taken it. At one point, his hand lingered a little too long against my side. Not in a way I could call out, not in a way he'd ever admit to, but long enough that I noticed. Long enough that I wondered if he noticed me noticing. "Not bad," he said finally, snapping the tape lightly against my skin before stepping back a fraction. "You've definitely been putting in the work." "Thanks," I muttered, reaching for the tape just to give my hands something to do. But he didn't let go right away. His fingers brushed mine as he handed it over, and for a split second, neither of us moved. Just that small contact, his fingertips grazing mine, felt heavier than it should have. I cleared my throat and pulled the tape from his hand. "Appreciate it." "No problem," he said, casual as ever. But there was a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth, like he knew exactly what kind of effect he was having on me. The rest of the night passed in a blur. We didn't bring it up again. He flopped back onto the couch, scrolling through his phone, acting like nothing out of the ordinary had happened. And maybe, for him, nothing had. Maybe it was just another favor, another laugh at my expense. But for me, it wasn't nothing. Lying in bed later, I replayed every second. The way his voice dipped low when he teased me, the way his hand pressed against my skin, the way his eyes darted down before he caught himself. I should have felt guilty. He was my friend. He trusted me enough to crash at my place. And here I was, twisting every casual moment into something more. But alongside the guilt was something stronger, something harder to deny. Excitement. It was reckless. It was dangerous. But the thrill of not knowing what might happen next was intoxicating. And maybe, just maybe, I wanted to see how far those boundaries could stretch before either of us admitted they were never really boundaries at all. If the earlier moments had been subtle, fleeting, easy to dismiss as imagination, what happened next shattered that illusion. We'd made it through most of the measuring, arms, shoulders, chest, without crossing too obvious a line. But when Daniel crouched again, looping the tape around my waist and hips, my body betrayed me completely. It started with the light pressure of his fingers brushing the waistband of my boxers. The contact was nothing more than necessary, but it sent heat rushing to my face and lower, an ache I couldn't hide no matter how desperately I tried. My pulse thundered in my ears. I shifted my stance, praying he wouldn't notice. But Daniel noticed. Of course he did. His eyes flicked downward, just for a split second, then darted back up to meet mine. The corner of his mouth twitched, the beginnings of a smirk he tried to swallow. He chuckled, low and awkward, rubbing the back of his neck with one hand while the other still held the tape snug against me. "Guess someone's taking this real seriously." The floor could have swallowed me whole, and I would have been grateful. My first instinct was to laugh it off, to crack a joke, to do anything but stand frozen with my body betraying me like this. But instead, the words tumbled out before I could think. It's just natural, right?" I said, my voice rougher than usual. Silence hung in the air. His smirk faltered, replaced by something unreadable. He didn't laugh, didn't step back. He just studied me for a moment, tape still pressed lightly against my skin. I swallowed hard, forcing myself not to look away. If I did, the moment would shatter. Daniel's expression softened, though not in a way I could clearly name. It wasn't pity, it wasn't mockery. It was consideration, a pause, like he was deciding which road to take and wasn't sure if he wanted to choose at all. Finally, he exhaled through his nose, a sound almost like surrender, and let out a small laugh. Not cruel, not dismissive, just nervous. Yeah, natural. That single word sank into me deeper than anything else he could have said. Because he didn't argue. He didn't make fun of me. He didn't even step away. He stayed. The tape slipped slightly in his hand, and his fingers brushed against my hip bone. Neither of us moved. My breath caught, sharp and shallow, and I felt his body tense as if he'd felt it too. For a long, suspended moment we were locked there, him crouched in front of me standing utterly still, both of us pretending to be caught up in the task, when we both knew something had already shifted. Finally, he straightened, tape dangling loosely from his hand. He didn't meet my eyes right away, focusing instead on winding the tape around his fingers like it suddenly mattered more than anything. "All right?" he said, his voice a little strained. "That's all of it." "Yeah," I echoed, though my voice cracked slightly. "All of it." He tossed the tape onto the coffee table, as if washing his hands of the whole thing. Then he flopped onto the couch, stretching out with studied nonchalance. But I noticed the way his chest rose a little faster than usual, the way he avoided looking at me even as he cracked open a soda and pretended to care about the commercials flickering on the TV. I sat down on the opposite end of the couch, too aware of the distance between us. My body still buzzed, every nerve lit up, and the silence pressed heavy, filled with everything we weren't saying. "So," he finally said, voice casual, eyes glued to the screen, "now you know your numbers." "Yeah," I replied. "Guess I do." Neither of us laughed. The tension sat between us like a third presence, thick and undeniable. For the rest of the evening, we avoided the subject, circling around it like it was a fragile wire we couldn't afford to trip. But every small thing, the way his knee brushed mine when he shifted, the way his eyes flicked toward me before darting away, was colored by what had just happened. Later that night, lying in bed, I couldn't stop replaying it. The way his fingers lingered, the way he'd looked at me when I told him it was natural, the way he hadn't said no. That was what haunted me most. He hadn't said no. Maybe silence wasn't agreement, maybe it wasn't permission, but it wasn't rejection either. And that left me spinning, torn between guilt and daring. Because as much as I tried to convince myself it had been nothing more than a weird moment, I knew better. We'd crossed a line, subtle as it was. We could laugh it off tomorrow, pretend it had never happened, but it would always be there, humming beneath the surface. And I couldn't help but wonder, what happens if we cross it again? The morning after felt heavier than any hangover I'd ever had. Not because I'd been drinking. I hadn't. But because silence hung in the apartment like fog, clinging to every corner. Daniel moved through the kitchen with a forced casualness, pouring cereal, leaning against the counter, scrolling on his phone. He said morning the same way he always did, like nothing was different. But I heard the fraction of a second pause before the word left his mouth. I noticed how he didn't quite look me in the eye. I muttered my own morning back, pretending to be absorbed in the coffee pot. My stomach twisted. Every memory of the night before replayed in sharp detail. The tape measure, his fingers brushing me, the silence after my stupid, it's natural comment. Had I crossed a line? I told myself I hadn't done anything wrong. Not really. He could have pulled away. He could have said something. But he didn't. And now here we were, caught in this strange no-man's land where neither of us wanted to acknowledge the truth. At first, I thought maybe it was just me. Maybe I was the only one feeling it, overthinking, stuck in my head. But then I caught him staring. It happened in flashes. I'd glance up from my coffee to see his eyes on me, only for him to jerk his gaze back to the cereal bowl as if nothing had happened. Later, while I was grabbing my bag for work, I felt the weight of his gaze on my back. I turned just in time to see him quickly look away, suddenly fascinated by the TV remote. If it had only happened once, I could have ignored it. Twice, maybe I'd have shrugged it off. But it happened over and over that day. He was watching me, even if he didn't want me to notice. And every time our eyes met, even for that split second, something stirred in me. Guilt, yes. Uncertainty. But also excitement. Like we'd stumbled into something forbidden, and neither of us had the courage to name it. The day dragged on with polite small talk. He asked if I'd be home for dinner. I said probably. He told me he might go out later. I shrugged. Everything sounded normal on the surface, but underneath, every word carried weight. By evening, I was exhausted from pretending. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, watching a game neither of us cared about, both of us pretending to pay attention. I couldn't focus on the score, not with the silence stretching between us like a rope pulled too tight. He cracked open a beer and offered me one without looking at me. I took it, our fingers brushing briefly as the can passed between us. That tiny contact made my chest ache. We didn't talk much after that. Just sat there, trapped in a limbo where we both knew but neither dared admit it. When I finally went to bed, I lay staring at the ceiling, restless. My body still remembered the tension of the night before, the way my pulse had raced under his touch. But my mind was a battlefield. Was I wrong for pushing it? Did he feel cornered? Did I take advantage of a moment he hadn't asked for? The guilt pressed heavy. But then I remembered the way he hadn't pulled back, the way he'd laughed softly instead of recoiling, the way his eyes lingered on me that morning. And I couldn't help but wonder if he was wrestling with the same storm. Sometime past midnight, I heard movement in the living room. Soft footsteps, the creak of the floorboards. I rolled onto my side, listening. Daniel's footsteps paced back and forth. He wasn't watching TV. No flicker of light came from the crack under my door. He was just moving, restless, like a caged animal who didn't know what to do with himself. I closed my eyes, but I couldn't stop imagining him out there, running a hand through his hair, jaw tight, pacing because something inside him wouldn't let him sleep, because something had shifted between us, and now neither of us could find our footing. I wanted to get up, to walk out there, to ask him what he was thinking, but fear held me down. If I opened that door, if I asked, there would be no going back. So I stayed where I was, listening to his footsteps until they finally stopped. The apartment sank into silence again, but I knew one thing for certain. Nothing about our silence was ordinary anymore. It wasn't the silence of comfort, or boredom, or even distance. It was the silence of two people circling the same secret, afraid to admit how badly they wanted to touch it. And that silence, heavy and unresolved, kept me awake long after Daniel's pacing ceased. The silence couldn't last forever. I think both of us knew it. It was only a matter of time before something snapped, before one of us said the thing we'd both been holding back. It happened late, long past midnight. I was half asleep when I heard a soft knock on my door. My heart jumped instantly. For a moment I debated pretending I hadn't heard, letting him walk away. But then his voice came low and hesitant. "Hey, you awake?" I sat up quickly, rubbing my eyes even though I was already wide awake. "Yeah, come in." The door creaked open and Daniel slipped inside, hands shoved deep into the pockets of his sweatpants. His hair was messy, his expression uneasy. He hovered by the door like he wasn't sure he should have come at all. "What's up?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though my chest was pounding. He let out a heavy sigh and shut the door behind him. Then he leaned against it, eyes fixed on the floor. I don't know, man. I can't sleep. Been pacing half the night." I nodded slowly, waiting. I didn't want to push, but the air between us was thick, buzzing with all the things left unsaid. Finally, he lifted his gaze to mine. His eyes looked different, vulnerable, almost scared. "About yesterday," he started, voice rough. My throat went dry. "Yeah." He shifted his weight, rubbed the back of his neck. I don't know what happened, but I felt it too, and it's messing with my head." The honesty in his tone stunned me more than the words themselves. Daniel wasn't the kind of guy who admitted uncertainty easily. He always played it cool, brushed things off with jokes. To hear him like this, raw, unguarded, hit me harder than I expected. "You don't have to explain," I said quietly. "It was just a moment." He shook his head sharply. "No, that's the thing. It wasn't just a moment. I've been thinking about it all day. And I keep telling myself I'm not. I'm not gay. That's not me. But then I keep replaying it and..." He cut himself off with another frustrated sigh, running his hands over his face. "I don't know who the hell I am right now." Something in me softened instantly. The frustration in his voice wasn't anger. It was fear. Fear of what it might mean. Fear of stepping outside the box he'd always lived in. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and gestured for him to sit. After a moment's hesitation, he crossed the room and dropped down beside me, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. "I trust you," he muttered, his voice muffled. "That's why I'm even saying this. Anyone else, I'd just laugh it off. But with you," he trailed off, shaking his head again. "It's different." My chest tightened at those words. I wanted to reach out to put a hand on his shoulder, but I held back. "Daniel," I said softly, "it doesn't have to be about labels. You don't have to call yourself anything. It's just about how you feel. About what's real right here." He turned his head, looking at me for a long moment. His eyes searched mine, as if trying to figure out if I really meant it. "And what if how I feel doesn't make sense?" he asked. "Then we don't force it to make sense," I said. "We just let it be." The silence stretched again, but it wasn't the suffocating kind this time. It was charged, yes, but gentler, like we were standing at the edge of something fragile, both afraid to break it. Slowly, hesitantly, Daniel shifted closer. His shoulder brushed mine, and I felt the warmth of him seep into me. My breath caught, but I didn't move away. His eyes dropped to my mouth for the briefest second before snapping back up. That was all it took. My pulse roared in my ears. "You don't have to," I started, giving him an out. But then his hand lifted, trembling slightly, and rested against the side of my jaw. My words died instantly. For a moment we just looked at each other, me frozen, him visibly terrified but not pulling back. And then, finally, his lips brushed mine. It wasn't a hungry kiss. It wasn't lust or heat. It was tentative, fragile, like he was testing the waters of something he didn't yet understand. My eyes fluttered shut, and I let myself sink into it, meeting him halfway. The kiss was soft, lingering, filled with hesitation but also something undeniably real. When we finally broke apart, we stayed close, our foreheads almost touching, both of us breathing unsteadily. Daniel let out a shaky laugh, though there was no humor in it, just disbelief. "What the hell are we doing?" I smiled faintly, my hand covering his where it still rested against my jaw. "Something honest." His thumb brushed my cheek before he pulled his hand back, running it through his hair nervously. "I don't know if I can handle this." "You don't have to have it all figured out," I said. "It's not about a label. It's not about deciding your whole future tonight. It's just about this, about us, right now." He exhaled slowly, shoulders relaxing a fraction. Then he leaned back, resting against the headboard, eyes staring at the ceiling. "You make it sound so simple." I lay back beside him, staring upward too. Maybe it is. Maybe we're the ones who make it complicated. For a while we sat there in silence, but it felt different now. The tension was still there, but softer, threaded with something new, something fragile and hopeful. As my eyelids grew heavy, I thought about how this wasn't just about attraction or desire. It wasn't about crossing lines or testing boundaries. It was about intimacy, the kind that comes from being seen, really seen, and not turning away. The kiss had been brief, tentative, but it carried more weight than anything else that had happened between us. Because it wasn't about sex. It was about connection. And that, more than anything, terrified me. Because connection was harder to walk away from. The days after that first kiss blurred into something new. Something neither of us dared name but both of us felt in every passing moment. At first, we tried to pretend nothing had changed. Daniel still sprawled across the couch like he owned it, still left his dirty dishes in the sink, still made sarcastic comments during movies. I still rolled my eyes, still teased him back, still nudged him in the ribs when he hogged the remote. But the difference was in the details. The way his knee brushed against mine and didn't move away. The way his laughter came softer when his eyes lingered on me a little too long. The way silence between us didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt comfortable. Charged, yes, but in a way that made my chest ache with something warm instead of guilt. Nights became our unspoken ritual. We'd watch TV until both of us were half asleep, shoulders pressed together, the glow of the screen washing over us. More than once, I woke up in the middle of the night to find us tangled on the couch, my head on his shoulder or his hand resting lightly against my arm. Neither of us talked about it the next day, but neither of us pulled away when it happened again. In the kitchen, the smallest things grew louder. Brushing past him to grab a mug, his hand grazing my waist as he moved by. The way we'd catch each other's eyes and both smile. Those moments filled the apartment with an energy I couldn't ignore. It was confusing and thrilling all at once. We were still friends, laughing, bickering, living side by side. But something softer had rooted itself beneath the surface, weaving through every glance, every accidental touch. One evening, we sat shoulder to shoulder watching a movie we'd both seen a dozen times. The plot played on, forgotten. What mattered was the steady rise and fall of his breathing, the way our thighs pressed together without either of us shifting away. Halfway through, Daniel shifted slightly, his hand brushing against mine on the couch cushion. For a second, neither of us moved. My pulse spiked, but I didn't pull away. And then, with a quiet exhale, he laced his fingers through mine. We sat like that for what felt like forever, eyes fixed on the screen but attention fixed entirely on the space where our hands met. When he finally turned his head, I did too. His eyes were cautious but steady, searching mine for hesitation. This time, when our lips met, it wasn't tentative. It wasn't testing. It was deliberate. The kiss was slow, longer than the first, a careful unfolding of everything we'd been holding back. My hand tightened around his thumb brushing against my skin as if to anchor himself. When we pulled back, he rested his forehead against mine, breathing hard. "I don't know what this means," he whispered. "Me neither," I admitted. "But I know I like it." He let out a small laugh, shaky but genuine. "Yeah, me too." We didn't try to define it that night. We didn't make promises or lay out what came next. Instead, we sat there, hands still entwined, the glow of the TV flickering over us as if the world outside had shrunk to just this. Two friends, becoming something more. And for the first time, I realized that I didn't need answers. What we had was enough. It was a Sunday morning when the truth finally surfaced. Not in some dramatic outburst, not after an argument or a heavy pause. Just in the soft light filtering through the blinds, coffee steam curling in the air between us. Daniel sat at the counter in his sweatpants, hair sticking up at odd angles. He cradled a mug in both hands, staring at the liquid as if it might hold the answers he'd been chasing. I busied myself with the toaster, pretending not to notice how uncharacteristically quiet he'd been. Finally, he cleared his throat. "I've been thinking," he said, voice rough. I glanced up. "Dangerous." He smirked faintly, but the look in his eyes was serious. "I don't want to leave." For a second, I thought he meant the apartment, his temporary crash pad that had stretched into weeks. But then his gaze lifted to meet mine, steady and vulnerable in a way I'd rarely seen. "I don't mean just here," he added. "I mean, I don't want to leave this. Whatever we're doing, whatever this is turning into, I don't want it to stop." My chest tightened, warmth spreading through me. For all the unspoken moments, all the sideways glances and soft kisses, this was the first time he'd put it into words. "You don't have to," I said simply. His shoulders relaxed, like a weight he hadn't admitted was there had finally lifted. He smiled, small, tentative, but real. After that, things between us didn't transform overnight. There were no fireworks, no sudden declarations that tied everything into a neat bow. Instead, what we built came quietly, through the kinds of rituals that root themselves into everyday life. Morning coffee became our anchor. He'd brew it strong, too strong, and I'd complain, only to drink every drop anyway. We started hitting the gym together, where his teasing about my form turned into encouragement, and my mock eye rolls turned into genuine smiles. Nights stretched into hours of conversation, sometimes deep, sometimes absurd. We'd sit on the couch, legs tangled, debating movies, sharing old stories, confessing insecurities neither of us had dared to say out loud before. And then there were the smaller things, the ones that mattered most. Brushing shoulders in the kitchen without pulling away, The way his hand would find mine absent-mindedly during a movie, the soft good night murmured in the dark. I realized, slowly, that this was love. Not the kind that bursts through the door in grand gestures, but the kind that sneaks in, unnoticed at first, until it's woven into everything. Love was the warmth of his laugh echoing through the apartment. Love was the quiet weight of his hand resting on my knee. Love was finding comfort in silence because we didn't need to fill it anymore. One evening, as we sat together on the couch, he leaned in and kissed me again. Longer this time, sure of itself, but still tender. When we pulled back, his forehead rested against mine, his breath steady. "I still don't have a word for this," he admitted softly. "You don't need one," I whispered back. "It's enough just to feel it." His smile in that moment said more than any label could. Looking back, I realized how unlikely it all was. He'd shown up at my door one evening with a backpack and a crooked smile, asking for a place to stay. What started as an inconvenience, a temporary arrangement, had turned into something neither of us expected. Sometimes love doesn't announce itself with trumpets and roses. Sometimes it's not a lightning strike or a grand confession under the stars. Sometimes it's found in small touches, shared laughter, quiet mornings, and the simple fact of not wanting to walk away. I asked him to measure me once, but in the end, he measured my heart and I measured his.